Okay, so let's just dive right in. We are dropping you, our listener, straight into a galaxy at its absolute breaking point.
Hmm.
We aren't talking about a slow burn here or some minor skirmish. This is the Black Fleet crisis, and it is all about immediate, just overwhelming pressure.
Exactly. And this deep dive, it's based on source material that throws us into a dual crisis, really. You have this massive galactic war threat on one hand.
From a brutal, completely uncompromising enemy.
Right. And then at the same time, there's this destabilizing political challenge that's aiming to unseat the New Republic's chief of state. And everything is at stake: personal relationships, core philosophies, even the future of the Jedi.
Yeah, our sources, they detail this period where it feels like everything is collapsing at once. Beloved heroes get captured, ancient secrets are being dug up light years away from any battlefront.
And moral lines are being drawn in blood. I mean, literally and politically.
So our mission today is, well, it's pretty complex. We need to untangle all these different threads.
We do. We need to understand how they all braid together to define the New Republic's victory. We'll be looking at Leia Organa Solo's political survival.
The deep cultural commitment that's driving Chewbacca's, impossible rescue mission.
And we'll chart Luke Skywalker's really profound philosophical awakening. And finally, we've got to get a handle on the shocking tactical variables that define the whole fight against the relentless Yevetha and their viceroy, Nil Spare.
It really is a true test of leadership, a tyrant's test, you could say, where personal allegiance, family duty, and just raw political survival all collide with this immense galactic responsibility.
And we have to start with the immediate pressure point, the enemy that forces all these characters into making their defining choices.
The Yevetha.
Right. So the primary antagonists here is the Yevetha. They're operating out of the Cournot cluster, and they are led by this intensely xenophobic viceroy, Nil Spare.
And they represent a military challenge that's, I think, really different from the Imperial remnants.
It is, because they're blending old tech with new. They're leveraging these powerful former Imperial assets.
Like that massive interdictor Star Destroyer, the Imperator.
The Imperator, yeah, which they've repurposed.
Yeah.
And they're using it alongside their own pretty formidable ships, the thrust ships. But the real key to the threat, it's not just the hardware.
No, it's the philosophy, the mindset that's dictating how they use it.
And that philosophy, it hits home right away. The crisis really ignites with a very calculated ambush of a New Republic ferry flight and a Commodore shuttle.
This was not some random pirate attack.
Not at all. The result was the capture of multiple high-value individuals. We're talking Commodore Tampion, Captain Strees, Lieutenant Barth, and most crucially, General Han Solo.
And that capture, it wasn't just a military move. It was a psychological weapon. And it was aimed squarely at Leia Organa Solo.
Exactly. To understand why it was so effective, you really have to look at Nil Spare's utterly ruthless psychology. The Yevetha, they genuinely do not view the New Republic as a rival nation.
No, they see them as vermin.
As impure vermin, yeah. Our sources show that Nil Spare's whole ideology is rooted in this deep xenophobia and a profound misunderstanding, or maybe actually a correct understanding of what he sees as human weakness.
He sees humans as divided, right?
Yep.
Valuing self-interest, family ties over the collective good.
Right. And fundamentally weak because, in his view, they fear death more than they fear betrayal. It's a fascinating and terrifying perspective.
He believes the Yevetha strength comes from what they call the All, this ancestral connection to their ancient claim on these stars.
And they boast about it. They say they're not civilized in the way humans would define it, and that's because their goal is not compromise, not negotiation.
It's just absolute annihilation of the pale vermin.
The context of that boast is so critical. He actually tells Han Solo directly, he says, "Your wars are decided by the death of 1/10 of a population, 1/3 of an army. Then the defeated surrender their honor, and the victors surrender their advantage. This is called being civilized." And then he finishes with, "The Yevetha are not civilized, General." It's an incredibly effective threat because he's just rejecting the entire rulebook the New Republic was built on.
And this feeds right into their propaganda strategy.
Oh, absolutely. Nil Spare and his Proctor Cogent, a guy named Tal Fran, they explicitly plan to use the hostages to humiliate and control Leia.
Which just confirms their belief that the pale vermin are uncomfortable with blood.
They want to broadcast suffering and defiance to just shatter New Republic morale before the real fighting even starts.
It's a brilliant strategy, really. Create a military crisis that forces a political collapse.
And it very nearly worked, because while Han was in a Yevethan prison, Leia was facing an immediate and an existential political crisis back on Coruscant.
And this is where the analysis gets really deep, because the infighting, it doesn't start with an enemy. It starts with a friend.
Yeah. Han's capture leads directly to this petition of no confidence, and it's initiated by Senator Doman Bruce of Velodia.
And Bruce is more than just a colleague.
So much more. He was Leia's mentor, a close friend. He operates from this place called Exmoor, his huge ancestral estate, which is a political symbol in itself.
It's like this sprawling monument to the Elodian past, reflecting their old imperial ambitions and the losses they suffered under Palpatine.
So he's a traditionalist. He fears instability above all else.
And his argument against Leia is, really, it's about political safety. He's afraid that her personal passion, her love for Han, will cause her to sacrifice the peace for personal reasons.
He demands she step aside, just temporarily. He even suggests a caretaker, Senator Ratakachit.
What a devastating political dilemma for her.
It is, because Leia knows that stepping aside, even for a moment, would just confirm Barris's fears. It would signal chaos to Nil Spare, who would be, and I quote, delighted to see the Senate distracted.
So she can't. She refuses to let others limit her options. She knows that her perceived weakness is the enemy's greatest asset.
And this whole political drama is driven by this incredible clash of governance philosophies. You have Senator Radagash of Elam, who is trying to apply what they call physical calculus.
Which is pure, cold, emotionless logic.
Yes. And this is really a Star Wars morality lesson disguised as political infighting. It's why the sources spend so much time on Leia's rejection of it.
Because the Elomic approach, it's classic utilitarianism, right?
Yeah.
Sacrifice the few Han and the hostages to save the many.
Exactly. And Leia rejects it entirely. She points out that pure logic would have called the entire rebellion futile from the start.
And she has that powerful line, I just don't believe that everything that matters can be quantified for the calculus.
It's a perfect summary of her position. She's asserting that intuition, principle, personal sacrifice, sometimes they have to override clinical logic, especially when you're dealing with people's lives.
And then her ultimate mentor, Mon Mothma, steps in to provide some crucial counsel.
Which really stabilizes her. Mon Mothma steers her away from focusing on just political survival and back toward fundamental principles.
She warns her about the danger of prioritizing staying in power.
And she stresses that you have to accept the consequences of your choices. The wisdom here is just. It's enduring. Mon Mothma advises that even your enemies will respect commitment, and that a conscience at peace is worth more than 1,000 tainted victories.
That basically gives Leia the moral backbone she needs to make this necessary and potentially politically disastrous choice.
And while Leia is solidifying her principles, the military leadership is fighting its own kind of a disinformation war to buy her time.
This is Admiral Drayson, right? Operating under the alias Alpha Blue.
Yep. Drayson understood that these political battles, they're won by appealing to public consciousness, so his team started strategically leaking devastating information.
Raw casualty records.
Documentation of colonies that had been devastated by the Yevetha. And this immediately shifted the blame for the atrocities back onto Nil Spare, and it changed the public and political tone.
It stopped the narrative from being just about Leia's fitness to lead.
At the same time, counterintelligence, led by General Riken, had a major breakthrough. They captured Belizabeth Orn, who was the consul of the Pakwapori.
But really a Yevethan spy.
A Yevethan spy, and this capture led them directly to this sophisticated, very dangerous black box hypercom.
And this wasn't just a communication device. I mean, this was pure Section 19 tech. Imperial intelligence at its darkest.
Oh, yeah. It was engineered with this terrifying security measure, an oxidation fuse that was set to go critical if anyone tried to open it manually.
And the blast would be equivalent to a proton grenade.
It was designed to destroy information, not protect it. That tells you everything you need to know about the commitment to secrecy.
So the Yevetha then try to leverage all this chaos.
They do. They broadcast this really sophisticated but completely fabricated message showing Nil Spare allied with a human Imperial Moff.
A Moff Braithis and this Grand Union fleet.
And it's aimed squarely at the New Republic to make them believe the Yevetha have allied with the Empire. The goal was just maximum political destabilization.
But it backfires.
It backfires spectacularly because Leia seizes the opportunity. She uses the revelation of the enemy's true evil heart, this clear, undeniable attempt at deceit, to just end the political infighting. Instantly.
She stands before the Senate, And instead of defending her personal choices, she focuses everything on the threat.
She forces them to affirm her decision to declare war. It was a perfect political countercoup. By confronting the enemy's blatant lie, she transforms her perceived personal weakness into this galactic mandate for war.
And that unity, that political affirmation, was absolutely vital.
It bought the fleet the unified commitment they needed to launch the military efforts to get Han back and confront the Yevetha head-on.
So Leia is forced to navigate all this deception and lies, refusing to let logical calculus decide who lives and who dies. And it's kind of fitting, then, that Luke is simultaneously confronting the biggest deception of his life.
Which leads him to a power based entirely on strategic illusion. But before we get to Luke, we have to talk about the Wookiee Code.
Right, so while all this galactic war and political maneuvering is happening on Coruscant, Chewbacca is dealing with his own crisis on Kashyyyk. And it's far more ancient, far more personal.
He's guiding his son, Lumpy, through his take.
The sacred tests of ascendance?
Exactly. And the cultural setting for these tests is just steeped in tradition and danger. They take place in the Shadow Forest.
The dark, lower-level jungle where the canopies are so dense that almost no light gets through.
And that's intentional. The environment is designed to test courage in darkness. The sources describe this terrifying habitat. Creatures like the trap spinner, the truckle.
Five-limbed shadow keepers?
Truckle, yeah. And they are personifications of the skulking, unseen enemy. They force the young Wookiee to confront these hidden threats that are really symbolic of their own internal fears. The environment itself is a crucible.
And Chewbacca, he knows the weight of this tradition. He went through his own take 200 years ago. But the most important test, the one that really defines a Wookiee's soul, is hunting the Katarn.
Known as the Old Prince of the Forest.
This is so crucial because it's not just a physical hunt, it's a spiritual pact.
It is. The hunt is a repayment for this long-ago gift of courage and strength that allowed Wookiees to find their Raptor.
Which translates roughly to inner courage, destiny.
Inner courage, destiny, soul strength. It's a complex concept. And the requirements for the hunt are just brutal. They demand absolute, unwavering resolve.
The hunter has to stand his ground, no flinching, until the Katarn's breath is literally in his face.
And the scent of its glands is in his nostrils. And then he has to take the beast in the center of the chest with your first shot because your second will find only empty air.
Precision under maximum duress.
And the problem is, Lumpy is struggling deeply. He's highly skilled in craftsmanship. He built his own impressive bowcaster, but he's failing the hunting tests.
So the final test, waiting in the Well of the Dead, it's still undone. And Chewbacca is forced to question his own son's Raptor.
And this internal Wookiee crisis just collides violently with his external duty to Han. Chewbacca's cousin, Frere, he begs him not to leave.
He argues that if Lumpy returns to the city without finishing his tests, without earning his baldric and his new name, the shame will be profound. It could destroy his standing in the community.
And this is the core dilemma of leadership, isn't it? Choosing immediate, painful duty, the life debt to Han Solo, over a long-term sacred commitment to his son's Hreik.
He has to choose one allegiance over another. And what does he tell Frere?
He says, simply, better that than for him to return over your shoulder, cousin. He chooses the possibility of shame over the certainty of death.
So he immediately starts preparing the Millennium Falcon for the rescue. But wait, the Falcon gets mods. I thought Han would never allow that.
No. And this just speaks to the severity of the threat and Chewbacca's absolute focus. Han, in his, characteristic stubbornness and ego, had always refused necessary modifications.
Specifically for that infamous flaw of the YT-1300 freighter, the restricted visibility aft into port.
The offset cockpit, yeah. That blind spot that required the Corellian carousel maneuver, that slow, recognizable left-hand roll, just to maintain situational awareness.
Han always insisted that a real pilot feels where his ship is.
Right. He refused a practical ranging pod. But the necessary fix comes from Chewbacca's cousin, Jowdrell, who is very mechanically perceptive.
So what does she do?
She solves the visibility problem brilliantly. She adds optical transducer panels to every existing viewport, the loading hatches, the gun turrets, even auxiliary access ports.
So she's not just fixing the ship, she's kind of addressing Han's flaw with a Wookiee truth.
Exactly. She says, a Wookiee hunter who stands beside a tree hides half the forest from his eyes. The Falcon becomes safer, more practical, and maybe a little less defined by Han's ego.
And as Chewbacca prepares to leave, his family steps up.
They do. His wife Mala, his cousin Shorin, Dryanta, they all insist on joining the mission. He refuses at first. He says, "I will not give yours," trying to protect them.
But Wookiee honor is paramount.
It is. They make it clear they can't refuse without shaming themselves and their clan. And Metala's response to Chewbacca's fear that her cleverness might cost them their lives is just so fierce, she says, "Or save yours."
It's a shared, lethal commitment.
And then comes the final, defining emotional moment. Lumpy insists on going.
He argues that if Chewbacca leaves him behind, it will destroy him. He's basically saying his father lacks faith in him, in his Erector.
So Chewbacca faces this profound choice. Stick to the sacred timing of tradition and risk crushing his son's self-worth, or prioritize his son's honor and self-belief.
And he chooses the latter. He concedes. He recognizes that denying Lumpy's courage would be the deeper betrayal.
He sends Lumpy toward the ship and tells Mala, "Now step back and let him see a mother's fierce pride, not her fear."
Wow. So by taking Lumpy, Chewbacca has effectively transformed this military rescue mission into Lumpy's final, unscheduled, and extremely perilous test of ascendance.
He is forcing the critique to happen in the heat of battle. It's a masterful choice that elevates the mission from a simple rescue into this crucial test of family loyalty and tradition in the face of, well, existential danger.
All right, so while the Wookiees are flying into danger and Leia is stabilizing the government, Lando Calrissian is off on a completely different track. He's pursuing this ancient, highly enigmatic mystery.
The Teljkon Vagabond, an alien vessel that seems to defy all known technological parameters.
And he's with a Republic intelligence team, led by Colonel Pakpakat.
Yes, and Lando, being Lando ever the gambler, the improviser, he decides to attempt this gentle, slow approach to the ship.
Directly contradicting Pakpakat's orders to just disable the vessel immediately.
And that decision, it failed spectacularly. And very typically for Lando, he, Lobot, and 3PO lose the ship, their rescue beacon, and Lando's usual suave control.
And 3PO, in classic fashion, is convinced they're doomed to oblivion.
Of course. But once they do gain entry, the internal view of the ship is described so vividly in the sources. It gives you this sense of being suspended in darkness, looking out at a ruddy brown planet painted with blue oceans and black mountains, all lit by a pale yellow star.
It's like the ship is carrying its home inside of it, a memory or a time capsule.
Something like that. And this brings us to the origin of the Vagabond, the planet Maltha Obex, which is locked in an ice age.
And this is where we meet Dr. Jodo Eccles, an archaeologist from the Oberon Institute.
Eccles is excavating Qella bodies, and he's working under a pretty suspicious contract for a private collector named Harkin Dyson.
And we know, of course, that Harkin Dyson is an alias for Admiral Drayson, the same guy manipulating the political narrative back on Coruscant.
Exactly. And Eccles is deeply concerned about Drayson's motives. He's afraid the remains will be treated just as treasure for his parlor walls, rather than respecting the rigorous protocols of the Office of Sentient Species.
It highlights that tension between pure academic research and military intelligence gathering.
But the Vagabond itself, it is communicating in a way no one expected. Through Lobot.
His cybernetic interface lets him process the huge flood of data from the ship.
It does, but it creates this profound internal crisis for him. A fusion, a loss of boundaries between his own consciousness and the ship's. It forces him into this state of single tasking.
The ship is essentially flooding his cybernetic ports with information that bridges biology and technology.
And Lobot struggles to interpret what the ship is. He processes its function as this complex concept, a protect against harm, a shelter and nurture.
And that ambiguity is reflected in his descriptions.
It is. He interprets the Vagabond as egg, mother, crush, repository, and chrysalis, all at once. And the rounded bodies inside the ship's tubules are equally ambiguous to him. Sleepers, keepers, corpses, creepers, sacrifices, and directors.
It's a puzzle that uses biological and mechanical terms interchangeably.
The real breakthrough comes when Dr. Eccles analyzes the Qella genetic material that NRI provided, material that Drayson had acquired earlier.
So Eccles, the academic, finally connects the biology to the technology.
He identifies two types of secondary genetic material, lesser and greater Icroth bodies, which are normal parts of Qella physiology. And this suggests a specific, profound biological relationship within the species, maybe a caste system or a dependent evolutionary link.
And here's the aha moment that connects to the Vagabond's control system.
Right. Eccles discovers the Qella genetic structure has a highly specific, organized code. It's almost like a programming language.
It's described as having a chemical alphabet with 4 letters, a vocabulary of words 2 letters long, a grammar of sentences 3 words long.
Now, this is profoundly different from known galactic biochemistry. In humans, in most known life, the genetic code is complex, it's nonlinear, it often relies on vast amounts of junk or non-coding DNA.
But the Qella code is highly specific and compact. It's essentially a complete executable program. The sources suggest that NRI and Dr. Eccles were, frankly, terrified by its computational implications.
If their DNA is a code this structured, it implies that the Qella are, in essence, living computers. It's a genetic language designed for explicit instruction.
So this highly specific genetic structure, this is believed to contain the exact code needed to stop or control the Vagabond.
Precisely. And this quiet, academic, technical investigation happening light years away from the war is actually yielding a tactical key, a means of communication and control. It's a perfect example of how knowledge itself, in this case genetic and archaeological knowledge, becomes the critical resource needed to win the conflict.
Right, let's shift now to Luke Skywalker. So we've seen Leia choose principle over logic, Chewbacca choose immediate duty over tradition. Luke, meanwhile, is on this very personal quest.
He's pursuing Akana Kube, hoping she'll lead him to the Fallanassi, who he believes are his mother's people. He's trying to fill that empty space he feels inside.
But his journey is immediately hindered by his choice of transport, the Mud Sloth.
A cheap, typical Verpine starship. The sources detail how it was built, just cutting every possible corner. And during repairs on a planet called Eutherus, which is gripped by war fever, they suffer this catastrophic power bus failure.
Which leads to a cascade processor failure.
So they're stuck. And this delay, it forces Luke to confront his duty. Akana, frustrated, suggests a morally questionable shortcut.
She wants to use their combined talents to just steal a faster, more reliable starship, specifically a Toomey Skyfire named Jump for Joy.
This is a huge ethical dilemma for Luke. He needs to move, lives are at stake, but the means she's proposing are just fundamentally unethical.
And he refuses, tersely. He shows that he observes strict limits on the means he'll employ, regardless of the urgent end.
But the delay does force into action in a different way. He feels the old demon of duty re-entering his consciousness, so he uses the downtime to access fleet archives.
And he confirms the situation in the Coronat cluster is escalating, and that his destination, Yevetha, has been involved in the fighting. The destruction of the Atrian commune is listed as probable.
But he maintains that philosophical discipline. He won't betray his principles, even with this personal yearning for his mother driving him. He's learning the same lesson Leia learned. The means define your character.
When they finally get to Yevetha, the site of the supposed H-Kig temple, they find something truly shocking.
Something that completely validates Luke's philosophical approach to power.
The entire complex, which the fleet memorandum listed as destroyed by the Yevetha, it's an enormous illusion.
It looks like scorched, shattered stone ruins, but in reality, a massive, intricate stone temple is still standing, intact, filled with thousands of industrious H-Kig workers.
Alu, the Fallanassi adept, reveals that their immense power to project this illusion is based on merging with what surrounds you.
A concept they call the current, which is the essence of concealment. They use the Force not to destroy, but to disappear.
And Luke immediately sees the tactical value here. He proposes they use this power to create a vast, terrifying, phantom New Republic fleet to intimidate the Yevetha into yielding.
It's a non-violent alternative to the inevitable bloodbath that a frontal assault would cause.
But his personal quest comes crashing down as they're preparing to act.
Yeah. Akana finally confesses the devastating truth. She lied. She never knew his mother, Nashira.
So why did she do it?
She admitted she was incomplete and had strayed from the path. She used Luke's quest to bring him to their circle, hoping to see what balanced the great power he possessed.
That is a brilliant and painful psychological manipulation.
It is, she confesses. I could only deceive you by knowing you. I could only deceive you with the truth. She leveraged his genuine desire and pain to lead him to a real philosophical awakening about the nature of the Force.
And despite that emotional turmoil, Luke processes it quickly and immediately acts on the Fallanassi's power.
He arrives at General Abbot's flagship, the Intrepid, to propose using this illusionary power as an alternative to the planned assault on Inzoth.
The military brass Abbot, Colonel Corrigan, Captain Morano, they're naturally skeptical.
Oh, of course. They're expecting a Jedi to talk about lightsabers and tactical strikes, not concealment and illusions.
So how does Luke prove his point?
Subtly, but very effectively, he uses the Force to discreetly rip the uniform decorations rank insignia, medals, braids right off the officers.
And deposits them neatly on Abat's desk.
Exactly. This simple act proves the reality of invisible forces and the subtle, profound ways the Force can be wielded.
And then Wei Lu provides the massive tactical proof.
She demonstrates the illusion by creating a phantom fleet of more than 30 ships, way more than the 22 expected in the real task force roaring past the observation deck. General Abat is, as you can imagine, profoundly impressed.
So Abat, being a seasoned military leader, he immediately recognizes Luke's strategic genius and offers him command of Ready Squadron.
But Luke declines. He insists his role is not as a warrior, and this is the culmination of his philosophical shift.
He tells Abat, I can't stand with one foot in their world and one foot in yours. My part in it will not be as a warrior.
He understands that divided loyalties, mixing the Jedi mission with military command, that's exactly what led to Palpatine's purge of the Jedi Order. By refusing the command, he's choosing principle over a military victory for himself. He has found a new way to contribute.
Okay, so all these separate threads. Leia's political maneuver, Luke's philosophical shift, the Wookiee's duty, the Qella code, they all converge on Enzoth for the final bloody battle.
Chewbacca and his family crew arrive, and they fix their sights on the enormous super-class Star Destroyer, the Pride of Yevetha.
Which was formerly the Imperial Star Destroyer Intimidator, and this is the ship holding Han and hundreds of other hostages.
And Chewbacca receives critical intel just hours before the attack. A highly sensitive, less than 40-hour-old assault plan for the SSD.
This was Drayson's high-stakes intelligence work, a move designed to raise the Falcon's success probability from like 1 in 20 to something actually survivable.
Exactly. Chewbacca notes that the map worries his crew because it's so detailed, but he trusts the anonymous source, a man named Formage, who he believes would rather make money cheating than killing.
So the assault itself is just a textbook display of Corellian Wookiee genius and sheer daring.
It is. The Falcon executes a micro-jump, a jump so short it barely registers, and it's masked by a string of exploding mines launched by Shorin.
Immediately upon arrival, Chewbacca applies maximum thrust and this high-G half-turn maneuver to kill the ship's velocity and match orbits of the SSD.
Diving inside the shield radius before the Yevethan batteries can even get a proper lock. It's an insane suicidal maneuver that only the Falcon could survive.
Once they're inside, Chewbacca and Shorin breach the hull, only to discover the horror within.
The supposed detention block has been converted into a breedery with marahas, these fleshy sacks filled with developing Yevethan young hanging in the alcoves. It's a grotesque realization of the Yevetha's inhumane efficiency.
They quickly realize they need to find the masked detention holds, which are labeled Cargo D2.
Meanwhile, Loompa Warmp is guarding the breach point. He's injured, he's dragging his leg, though Chewbacca only notices later, but he continues his duty without a single complaint.
This is his Rector taking hold. He's proving his courage in the face of the ultimate unmasked threat.
And Lumpy's final test comes on the flight deck when he has to neutralize the shielded Yevethan guards protecting Cargo D2. He stands up into a hatchway and fires his explosive quarrels.
And Chewbacca watches his son and realizes Lumpy has finally found his Rector. He faced the Katarn without flinching, and his aim had been true.
The Fortyke is completed, not in a secret forest, but in the most unconventional of ceremonial arenas. A blood-soaked Star Destroyer hangar bay.
So they rescue Han. He's found with 100 other prisoners, including Imperial slaves and colony survivors.
Han, of course, insists they save everyone. But Chewbacca, carrying a severely wounded Shorin, only manages to extract Han and a woman named Inara.
Inara is a fascinating detail. She had apparently called out to the Wookiees with her mind, sensing their arrival.
Yeah. Han notes sadly that the other prisoners just failed to react to the chaos. They were so scattered in their misery. It shows the depth of the despair the Yevetha had inflicted. The majority are left behind, a tragic necessity that really underscores the cost of this rescue.
And now we get to the most shocking twist. The one that truly determined the outcome. The Black Sword Command coup.
The New Republic's victory wasn't won by superior firepower alone. It was won by a sudden, decisive Imperial mutiny.
Major Syl Saran, acting captain of the Intimidator, the Pride of Yevetha, he led the 513 surviving Black Sword Command veterans from Camp Hall.
These were survivors who had purchased their lives 13 miserable years earlier by teaching the Yevetha how to operate and construct capital warships. They were slaves who had become indispensable technical trainers.
And Saranin chose the precise moment to strike.
He waited until Nilspur delivered his vile, arrogant, contemptuous screed to the New Republic fleet, detailing how their vigorless blood will boil in your ears. It was the moment of maximum humiliation and power for the Viceroy.
And then Soranin pressed hidden buttons in his comb wand.
A commonplace object. And these buttons activated controllers he'd secretly installed in 4 other mundane objects throughout the command compound. And this sudden, coordinated action neutralized all the Imperial-type ships.
The SSD, the Interdictor, the Star Destroyers.
Yeah.
They just stop and veer off, having been retaken by the Imperial veterans.
And then Soranin wants the Alliance to know exactly who they owe their victory to. He claims it proudly as a strike by the Imperial Navy, not a defection to the New Republic.
That's a remarkable moral calculus. He commits treason against his enslavers, the Yevetha, but maintains his allegiance to the Imperial banner.
Nil Spare's internal retaliation was swift and savage. Enraged by the destruction of his breederys and the failed predictions of his proctor cogent, Talfrine.
Spare personally executes Fran, severs his head completely.
Yes. Fran's failure was his inability to predict the foolish stubbornness and dangerous independence of the vermin, and the barbarity continues. Sparran orders Fran's carcass to be made into meal, ensuring none of his blood contaminates the Marahas, the young in the breederys.
It's a complete breakdown of composure in the face of unexpected betrayal.
The remaining fight against the T-type thrust ships then turns into this brutal slugfest, a war of attrition. The New Republic suffers major losses, the Yakas, the Ballarat.
Especially when the fanatical Yevathan fighters start flying these devastating suicide runs.
The turning point comes only when the illusionary Phantom Fleet, created by Ouyalu and the Fallanassi, thanks to Luke's intervention, vanishes. This forces the remaining Yevetha ships to contend with the actual superior New Republic numbers, and the fleet ultimately prevails.
And we also see a quiet moment of redemption for Platt Mauler, the lone survivor from the Polnai raid.
He flies a fleet dig in support, feeling his duty is just to put a more experienced pilot in a fighter cockpit. He eventually gets his chance in an X-Wing, proves his courage by ignoring the suicide fighters, and joins the fleet defense.
And finally, the fate of Nil Spare.
Soranin captures him, refuses to fight for his enslaver a moment longer. He stands in the escape pod access tunnel and informs the Viceroy that the project failed.
And he jettisons him in an escape pod into hyperspace.
Delivering the cold promise, I do know that you will die there. A fitting and incredibly isolating end for the genocidal leader.
Okay, so with the military crisis resolved, the characters turn their attention to the deeper philosophical and scientific mysteries they uncovered. Luke and Dr. Eccles dive into the Teljkon Vagabond at Malfa Obex.
And Luke is now armed with the principles of concealment he learned from the Fallanassi. He uses his heightened senses, his intuition, to reassess the vessel.
He realizes the ship is not a museum or a lifeboat. It's something far grander.
It's a toolkit for rebuilding a destroyed world. He senses the ship is alive but dormant, sleeping.
And he extends his senses deep into the planet, reaching through the ice, and finds a faint, slow, collective heartbeat.
He's been looking for the Qella survivors in the wrong place. He realizes the bodies Eccles found on the ice surface, they weren't the main contingent, they were the dissenters, those who chose to remain outside the grand design.
This changes the entire narrative of the Qella. They weren't passive victims waiting for rescue.
No, they had foreseen the moonstrike and used the time to prepare themselves and build the Vagabond, the toolkit, to await the environmental thaw.
And Luke uses the principles of concealment, the Fallanassi skill taught by Ouyalu, to draw a curtain of the Force around the Vagabond and the Qella survivors deep within the planet.
He ensures their privacy, their protection from the galaxy that has now discovered them.
Eccles, just awed by this resurrection and Luke's commitment, concludes they have to leave Malfa Obex silent on the charts for 100 years or 1,000.
This whole sequence is Lu's ultimate victory. He's using the Force not to fight, but to protect life, preserve truth, and uphold the principles of non-interference.
Speaking of commitment, Luke returns to his hermitage, a prison he had built from the broken pieces of his father's fortress retreat.
A place where he could hide from the duties he feared. He recognizes that temptation to isolate himself, and he dismantles the retreat entirely.
He acknowledges, it's not time yet for me to go away. He rejects isolation and embraces his role in the wider galaxy.
He realizes the Jedi must not be defined by monastic retreat, but by engaged, principled action.
And in a final word on the immediate aftermath, Han Solo, recovering from his terrifying ordeal, is transferred back to Coruscant.
And the Wookiees, perhaps newly emboldened by Lumpy's bravery and the successful rescue, they insist on overseeing the move, demonstrating the strength of their kinship ties.
Luke finally reunites with Leia and her children. Jason, Jaina, Anakin at the palace. He's found his new purpose, which is exactly what Akina had hoped for. Not through fighting as a warrior, but through principle and accepting the consequences of nonviolence.
He helped bring the Yevetha to their knees using strategic illusion rather than brute force. This entire crisis, the Tyrant's Test, it's ultimately about the ethics of power and the definition of civilized leadership. #tag outro.
So what does this all mean for you? Our deep dive into the climax of the Black Fleet crisis shows that victory was achieved on 4 simultaneous, unexpected fronts, and none of them involved a straightforward fleet engagement.
First, the political maneuverings of Admiral Drayson and Leia, they were as crucial as any military action. The ability to control information, leak casualty reports, and shift the public narrative proved vital to stabilizing the government.
It proves that in modern conflict, political perception and information control are primary weapons.
Second, the power of shared cultural codes like the Wookiee Hertake provided the necessary inner strength. Chewbacca's willingness to break tradition to save his friend, and Lumpy's need to prove his character in the most brutal of arenas.
That gave the rescue mission the tactical crew and the courage it needed for success.
Third, the shocking value of Imperial disloyalty. Major Sarannon's Black Sword coup was the single most decisive tactical factor. It neutralized the enemy's main fleet strength instantly.
It's a painful but clear lesson. An enslaver can never truly trust his slaves, especially those he's relied on for their technical expertise.
And finally, Luke's philosophical shift was realized. He traded the role of warrior for that of an adept who wields power responsibly, using principle and illusion to save lives and enable the preservation of an entire civilization on Maltha Ovex.
For you, the learner, this deep dive demonstrates that leadership in a crisis means defining the means as much as the end. Every disparate event, a son's hunting test, the structure of alien DNA, a political skirmish in the Senate, they all intersected to determine the galactic outcome.
You have to be equally proficient in diplomacy, science, and the art of war.
We saw the immense, almost overwhelming power of the Fallanassi illusion. And if knowledge of the Force and the current can create a successful deception that changes the course of a galactic war without firing a shot, this raises an important question.
What are the limits of truth in any conflict? And how do you discern reality when strategic illusion becomes the dominant weapon?
The enemy tried to control Leia with lies about an Imperial alliance. Luke countered by creating an even greater, yet ultimately benevolent lie that shattered the enemy's resolve.
Something to ponder as you navigate your own complex situations where the line between tactical illusion and reality is constantly shifting.
We appreciate you taking the deep dive with us.
Until next time.